everyone. We have folks just arriving to the lightning talk, so we will allow everyone to enter the room, so-called room, and then we'll get started in about a minute.
Hello.
Hi, Anu.
Hi, I got completely
That's okay.
off.
That's okay. You're back, and we have folks who are arriving into the room now, and we're just going to get started in about a minute.
Thanks, Andrea.
No problem. Okay, well, it is 1 minute past 2:30 here in very sunny and beautiful Ottawa. So we are going to get started. We have lots to talk about and just a short amount of time. Welcome everyone to another lightning talk for the Emergency Community Support Fund and for community foundations. My name is Andrea Dix, and I am with the team at Community Foundations of Canada. As I said, I'm here in sunny Ottawa, which is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I'd like to welcome everyone to this conversation. I can't help but think that as we begin a conversation about the gendered impact of COVID-19, that a year ago this week, a year ago today, Canada was hosting Women Deliver in beautiful Vancouver, and that there was lots of conversation about gender equality and the way in which it is shifting around the world, the work that we still have to do, and the ways in which different people are experiencing the world through the lens of gender. And so it seems quite appropriate, given that that was a year ago, that we are in a dialogue today about the gendered experience of COVID-19. And this really builds on some of the conversations we've been having throughout the week. In particular, for those of you who joined us yesterday for a conversation about intersectionality, I think this conversation today with Deepa, Nadine, and Anu is going to really build on that particular concept and help us to better understand the way in which the outbreak of disease impacts people and groups differently, and really understand what the gendered implications are of COVID-19. So I am going to turn everything over to our wonderful speakers, and wanted to begin by expressing great gratitude to each of them for joining us for this conversation today to share their experience, their wisdom, and their time. So Deepa, I will turn it over to you to begin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. A slight correction. I'm executive director of the Barbra Schlifer Clinic. I just celebrated my first year anniversary. So just I wanted to flag that because I think it still says my previous position. Thank you so much for organizing this webinar, and thank you so much for everyone who has joined us. In terms of women's and girls and how they have an increased exposure to the COVID-19 impact and implications related to it, I have been thinking about, there has been a lot of attention paid to the intimate partner violence piece, but I think along with that, a few other things that need to be thought about is the domestic and ongoing domestic and care responsibilities that women and girls have always been taken care of, and how that actually adds to the ongoing survivorship of not only the intimate partner violence piece, but also the structural violence or the familial violence in some cases. In paid work, if we take the example, women commonly have roles as the frontline health professionals and hospitality, cleaners, personal support health workers. And in social sector where I work, I think I can tell you that almost 90% of the workforce on the front lines, continuing to deliver the services in the hard environments, are also women. We know that the crisis events such as a pandemic tend to worsen the pre-existing social and economic vulnerabilities. So some of this is not new, some of this is pre-existing, and it's just getting worse day after day. Another really important aspect to remember is that racialized communities, those living in poverty, and women coming from those historically marginalized backgrounds, which is Black, Indigenous, non-status migrant women, they are harmed way more by the disaster than others. They have less access to resources. They also have less access to ongoing capacities to face this situation, but they also face higher risks of protection in this environment. It could be abuse, it could be unequal access to assistance, but it is also, and more rightly so to be mentioned in this environment, they're more prone to discrimination and violence in these environments. So while COVID-19 has led to new issues, the connections between the economic downturn and increase in domestic violence that has always been established has come to the forefront, and we have been paying attention to that, but not necessarily thinking about all of these other underlying issues. So in terms of some of the suggestions that I would say, the topmost which I have in my mind thinking about gender implications of and giving any resources or funding out should be thinking about the federal tax model where we all make a claim and we get a return, the money back, and the processing of that, whether and how to track all that paperwork happens later on. So we make a claim, we get the money, and we can all be asked for more information later on, but the money comes first. So any funding or resources that goes out can adapt the same kind of model. So first hand over the money, let the situation of emergency and immediacy be taken care of, and let's talk about the admin pieces. So make it least admin is one of the suggestions that I have. I have 3 more very quick suggestions that I want to add to that. So there is a lot of attention to the immediate need, but that immediate need is very much connected to the capacity which was already there or not. And we know that historically, structurally, a lot of capacity of the organizations have been reduced over the years. And if that is what has happened, then any kind of immediate assistance needs to think about what is the impact of this funding and over the coming period of time. So not necessarily just being focused in this emergency response, but also thinking about that this emergency response can lay foundation for increasing capacity of some of those organizations or projects within the organizations which were completely stripped away, but are really well needed in this new environment. And we know this environment, the uncertainty of this environment is very daunting, but the uncertainty of this environment also is giving us strength to make some stronger decisions which are really needed. In the same breath, what I would say is that thinking about and supporting the most marginalized grassroots groups. So an example I can give you from the clinic is that recently when our local United Way was supporting us with some emergency funds, we supported a couple of small groups of racialized young people who would not have otherwise qualified to apply for the fund because they needed trustee organizations to help them. So getting that information out there, readily available, and asking when you're giving donations or when you're giving money out for funders to take that collective responsibility to ask. So how would you make sure that you will be supporting those smaller grassroots groups in your community? What systems do you have in place while giving out funding? So those are my comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions that may come out.
Thanks so much for that, Deepa. We encourage folks to list any questions that you have in the chat box, and then we'll sort of go through hearing from Nadine and hearing from Anu, and then we'll come back to some questions. Thank you very much, Deepa. Much appreciation for those thoughts. Nadine, you. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Deepa, for setting the stage. Much appreciated. Hi, everyone. I'm here speaking to you from Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm the executive director of the Women's Health Clinic here. Women's Health Clinic is a community health center, community health clinic that offers services to women non-binary, trans, inclusive folks. And we do everything from abortion care to birthing and all sexual and reproductive health care in between. So a couple of things I will talk about is the gendered nature of COVID and how it has impacted people who access our services. I also want to talk a little bit about gender, of course, and talk about how important that is to think about as you review the applications that come across your table. In a bit about intersectionality, but also I also have a dual role on this panel because I'm also the chair of the Rebuilding Lives Granting Committee with the Canadian Women's Foundation. I've been a granting member of a committee, violence prevention, that's what it was called. So there's been some changes in the structure. So I've been with violence prevention grants for the last 4 years, I believe. And so I'll talk a little bit about, I think, some of the things that we do that are crucially important when you apply a gendered lens and look at the funding that's coming through. And I want to thank Deepa for some of the pieces that you mentioned in terms of your recommendations, because they overlap with mine as well. First, gender. I think it's really, really important as you're looking at your proposals and what's coming across your inboxes with regards to the current funding that's being proposed, is to consider an inclusive lens. Gender is just one component, and if you're talking about intersectionality of all of the colliding pieces that are facing us in the middle of what I would call this current state of emergency. It's not just about COVID, it's about race, it's about gender, it is about poverty, it is about access. And those are all coming together in this moment. I have to say I've had a really difficult time over the last couple of months with the language that comes out about we're all in this together, all being the operative word, because really it has amplified the gaps in our social security system. It has amplified the ways in which certain communities have not been able to access food, shelter, medical services, and the list goes on. And women, as we know, and what I talk about here is cisgendered women, but also trans women and non-binary people have been disproportionately impacted, not only through COVID, the current health crisis, but also because they are coming into this crisis already disadvantaged, because many of them are single parents, many of them are experiencing violence, many of them are shouldering the burden of this crisis along with childcare, along with schooling, along with providing. And what we used to call a double day for women has become a 24-hour job. So we are working from home. If we're working, and again, that's talking about those of us who are here at this table, we have to think about all of those who are not. We are feeding our families, we are providing for our families, we're doing kind of the whole 9 yards. So when you think about an intersectional lens, you think about us and them. And everything the media and everything that's been put out there about COVID is not inclusive by any means of the communities that we serve. And at Women's Health Clinic, we have seen this. We've seen more and more people, though we've remained open throughout as a health service provider. What we've seen is people coming through our doors or calling or saying, I can't get the most basic access. And in sexual and reproductive health, that might be birth control. But what we know is that is going to have an impact on the need for abortion services, the need for birthing care, the need for pregnancy tests, like all of the things. It never stops here. So when you think about those applications that come across your table, you really want to be paying attention to, okay, maybe there wasn't a huge impact during COVID, but post-COVID, there's always going to be the bubbling effect, the rippling effect on those disproportionately impacted communities and people. With regards to trusting the people that are applying for your funds, I think, Deepa, you mentioned thinking about small groups, independent groups, youth-led organizations. They're the ones, again, if you think about who's been most impacted by this, I know here in Winnipeg, all of the women's centers and the very small drop-ins and all of the small nonprofits have really been impacted by not just COVID, but again, the needs of the communities that they serve who typically are already underserved, and that amplification of that, the need. So don't just look at the big ones. And I will say Women's Health Clinic, we're a big one, but we have very specific needs. We're a big budget, we have capacity, we're a healthcare provider, but there are so many of those small organizations. And I know some of the things the foundation has done in the past is not only do the trustee process, but really alleviate all of the ways in which you can gain access to funding by really having authentic relationships. So remove the barriers that you can have. Removing barriers is really important in terms of, I love the application. I think I said this to Jacqueline yesterday. I love the short 20 minutes or half an hour that it's going to take for folks to apply for the funds. And I think you have to also decolonize or move away from the idea that we are accountable as the holders of this money to the funder or to the taxpayers, because I think that is often something that gets in the way of making sure the people who need it the most get access. So you have to trust the people that are applying to the funds. That doesn't mean you go through the checks and balances and make sure that, yes, they are legit, all of those things, but really think about that when you filter those questions through your own experience as a privileged person, as the holder of the funds. You have to really balance that with that intersectional lens. And so at the foundation, when we do our granting committees, we really do look at all of the needs. We really apply that intersectional lens across the country, the diversity of the neighborhoods and the communities that we serve. We prioritize Indigenous-led organizations. We prioritize trans inclusivity and non-binary youth-led organizations. We prioritize people with disabilities. That's a group who's absolutely been impacted by COVID. When you think of health, we prioritize mental health. You have to think about the grief that is connected to what's happening, the ways in which people are really handling this crisis, and not medicalize it, but rather see it as a social issue. So I think I'll leave it there. I hope I've touched on all of the things that I wanted to say, and maybe if there are questions we can add there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Nadine. There was so much wisdom in what you just shared. I've been taking copious notes, and I know that my colleagues across community foundations have been as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea.
Anu, it's always lovely to see you and to have you with us. Over to you.
Lovely, thank you so much. And thank you for organizing these webinars for people to learn from such amazing community experts like Deepa and Nadine. I've been very lucky to have been working with them for a number of years and continue to learn. So today I was also taking notes, Andrea, and I always learn when I connect to such fantastic leaders in the community. So thank you for accepting this invitation, Deepa and Nadine. So I'm going to maybe try and focus on a few key things, not to repeat anything, and I wholeheartedly support everything that Deepa and Nadine have already said, because it definitely resonates with what came through in our survey. We did a flash survey at the beginning of our interaction with grantees when the restrictions started, when the lockdown started. And we continued through working with Ontario Nonprofit Network and also Imagine Canada. And many of these themes are emerging, but what we have found is that the understanding of what it means to apply a gendered lens is still thin on the ground. I think there's extreme pockets of high knowledge in certain areas, and then in other areas it's a bit of an add-on, it's a bit of a concern that people consider after the fact. And if there's one thing I would really encourage everybody to think about right now, as they think about who's reading their applications and who are their committee members, to what extent do the committees reflect the realities of the communities they're giving money to? So a bit like Nadine just said, it's not necessarily enough to say, oh, this person is a fantastic accountant and will look at our budgets really well and make sure that these things are followed through on an accountability level, but perhaps also found that person who's an accountant and has a lived experience as a Black woman in a firm, and therefore can put on another pair of glasses too and really live through the intersectional reality and understand why a community might be asking for some kind of funding or some kind of expense that maybe, in my experience, that expense doesn't make sense to me. But if it makes sense to somebody who has lived through what that community needs. So that would be another question or another suggestion I would add is when it comes to restrictions on what money can be used for, try and be obviously as light as possible, but be open to core funding. And this is a request from the feminist movements all over Canada. Core funding right now is essential. It may seem like this is an emergency fund to respond to COVID, but COVID-19 and the effects on women's communities has meant that many organizations don't have access to the ways they would normally be able to fund their core activities. So they need to continue to fund those. And they're adding other things on top of their core activities. So they need both. So don't shy away from being able to fund what looks like capacity funding or something that is central to the mission of the organization. That's important. And even more important when you add on that one of the effects we see in some of the outcomes of the pandemic is a rolling back of some basic human rights again and again. And that includes like how we look at intersectionality. So women, trans rights, the rights of people with disabilities, those things are being eroded right now. So in order to support the defense of those rights, those women's movements, those women's community organizations need their core funding so that they need to support direct service, but then they need their executive director who can go and talk to governments about what they need funding for. They need their political analysis staff available to be able to go and say, we need this funding and it needs to be present for all these reasons for all these organizations. So those are things that may not appear to be emergency funding, but they really are. I think another thing to think about is the difference between, and this really echoes what Nadine and Deepa have said, and I might just take it one step further. Look for groups with deep roots in the community and long histories. There are going to be groups who suddenly seem to pop up and say, we're doing something really important, you need to fund us, we're the only ones able to do this. I would question sometimes some of those new groups who seem to have a magic formula because very often they haven't necessarily lived through an experience like this in the past, and you need an organization that has been through the ups and downs to be able to securely respond to the ups and downs that this particular emergency is going to bring us. And don't worry if that seems to be a small community or a community where you're suddenly increasing their funding by an nth degree that might be beyond what they immediately seem able to respond to, because both of those things mean that they are actually, again, they've got their roots in the community and they're responding to a need that has been identified by the people around them. And maybe also think sometimes, search out those groups. So a very important point was made about how hard it is for communities, women with disabilities, to get funding and to come forward and find a way to come together and then do the work they need to do, because they have so many barriers, even to start by forming a group. So sometimes that means going out and saying, we want to fund a community who's working on disability issues. We want to make sure it has the right model. So we're going to stay away from the medicalized model. We're looking for a disability justice model, and we're going to wait until that group comes forward, because sometimes in a rush to give emergency money out, which is legitimate and absolutely needed, I don't question that, but we might miss. So there's maybe a contingency model that could be put into place there. And then maybe one of the last things I would say is think about long-term impacts. And that goes back to core funding and why we need to maintain organizations with long histories. we've seen from Fort McMurray, we've seen from some of the forest fire, the communities impacted by forest fires and floods, the impact of the emergency goes on for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Families are changed because of this, and the community groups that will be there offering multiple services need to be able to think about that capacity that they will have as restrictions start to lift. We know that rural and remote communities where things have been kind of silent and scarily quiet is what it's been described to us, will see a sudden influx of need. So even if they're not able to say right now there is X need, but we know it will come, I say trust those communities. As Nadine said, we know we can trust them to know what their communities will need. So I'll stop there, and like everyone else, I'm open to questions.
Thank you so much for that, Anu. I have just taken so many notes, and I want to share back a couple of the things that really sat with me as all of you were speaking. But I know, Nadine, you wanted to add one more thing. I think you were inspired by
I was
as well. Go ahead.
Sorry, and it will take just 10 seconds. What some of you might see an acronym BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color. I think it's really, really important, and not just right now, to amplify Black voices and Indigenous voices, but be careful as we see the activities that are happening, for example, with the Black community, where we will see settler and white communities apply for funds to help those in need, to help the Black community, to help the Indigenous people, to help those people. I just wanted to flag that we want to be careful to not fall down the trap of the white savior or the sort of groups of people who all of a sudden see an issue that they want to address, but they don't engage the community who are most affected in that. So that was just what I wanted to add. Thanks, Andrea.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that, Nadine. And we certainly have heard that through other conversations as well. So in the example of the Black community lightning talk that we hosted on Tuesday, there was a reference to taking a 3B philosophy, in that you're supporting organizations that are Black-led, Black-focused, and Black supported. So we can apply that across a variety of populations, but yes, thank you for that reminder. So a couple of highlights that I just want to summarize in terms of what I heard from each of you. There's the suggestion of making things administratively easy, making them light. And we have one question about that I'm going to come back to. We heard about ensuring that or recognizing that emergency response can also be about supporting capacity that had been lost in the past, but that capacity is needed now and into the future. We heard from all of you about supporting small grassroots organizations, not just the big ones, as you said, Nadine, and really ensuring that we are supporting those small grassroots organizations through some structural partnerships potentially, but also in the communications and making sure that we're being thoughtful in our outreach as well as decision making. I really liked the inclusive lens language that you were using, Nadine, and I think that is really complementary to the conversations that we've been having throughout the week. There was also the suggestion, and Anu, I heard this from you very strongly, and Nadine as well, about the post-COVID impacts. So the bubbling or the ripple effects, or even the long-term effects, and how that can be woven into the support that's required. There was conversation from all three of you about trusting the applicants, building authentic relationships, removing barriers, and really ensuring that those who know the needs best are the ones who we are listening to. Anu, you made a really great point around who is on the grant review committee. And so are those individuals, are they bringing lived experience with a lens of the type of support the type of applications that we are reviewing. So that was a great point. And then I also heard, Anu, I really liked the way that you reminded us that through COVID-19, through this pandemic, and through other elements that are happening in our world right now, there has been a rolling back of human rights. And that we have an opportunity and a responsibility to support those who are defending these rights. So thank you for that reminder. And then the last point that I just really wanted to highlight that I heard was looking for and searching out, which I think is really important, not just being responsive to the applications that come in, but proactively going out into community and inviting applications from those organizations and leaders that have deep roots in the community and long histories in this type of work. So we had a question that I think we have 1 minute left, and I'll just put out to the group, but Emma had a question about transcribing oral applications, and is that a way in which we could be supportive of different populations and in that concept of administrative lightness? So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that.
I don't mind oh, go ahead, Deepa. I'll go after you.
I just wanted to say that we are all meeting on a Zoom call, so definitely maybe a video where I can tell you the story for a project I need funding for would be a brilliant idea. I don't think there's anything wrong with the fact of that suggestion. I think it's a great suggestion. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to say that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I want to be really respectful of the three of you and of the time that you have offered to us and to those who have joined us. And just we'll wrap up now, but I wanted to again express our gratitude for your time and for the ideas that you have shared today. I have written down more than what I shared back, and so I have no doubt that the individuals who are representing many different community foundations here today have also been scribbling madly in order to take in the wonderful information that you have shared with us. So with that, I will bid everyone a wonderful day. I hope the sun is shining wherever you are. It looks like it is for our panelists, so we sit in the sunshine together. And again, just much gratitude for the work that you're doing and the support that you have offered us very generously here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care all.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well done all. Thank you.